You know what? If I'm going to address the concept of a critique, a review, an argument, and how those are put together, I've been doing this for 3 semesters online now. It's my job. So let's switch gears.
A few moments later.
Welcome to class. All right, so I looked at some of these things. I looked at a video or two, and all the arguments for why this is horrible and a slap in the face for the fans and a desecration of the franchise and all these things can be summed up in a couple of points. But before I get to that, we need to understand exactly what we mean by a review. Now, first of all, everybody, regardless of who they are, has the freedom and the right to like or dislike something. Everything that you see, my own opinions, everything online that you see on TV, that's somebody's opinion being explained and used as an argument. Now, we all have different likes, and we have really no control over what those likes are. There are people who love horror movies, but they have to have gore. There are people who insist that there's no such thing as a PG-13 horror movie because that can't possibly be scary. There are people who like action movies, and they have to be a certain type of action movies. They like car chases, or they like they'll only watch comedies or rom-coms. There's people who couldn't sit through a horror movie if you begged them. All right. Now, all of these are likes and dislikes based on experiences, just innate things of things that we've been exposed to our entire lives. There is no such thing as being wrong or right in what you like. But in doing a review of something, you're trying to convince others that your opinion is right and true, and this is the way it is. I do that too whenever I try to give you my opinion of these movies. But in doing so, you have to present an opinion, something which is completely subjective, and make it look like it's objective. And that's where the argument part of something comes in. So while your opinion, regardless of what it is your opinion, and it is valid no matter what because it's an opinion. Everybody's not entitled to an opinion, though. Everybody's entitled to an informed opinion. And how you frame that in the context of whether you want to explain whether something is good or bad, that's where there is such a thing as bad and good opinions. Because the things that you decide to review or critique are created within certain parameters for certain audiences. You wouldn't judge a horror movie the way that you would judge a romantic comedy. You wouldn't judge an action movie the way you would judge an educational show for kindergartners, for example. All of these things are trying to achieve different things and have different sets of criteria. So, in reviewing or critiquing Masters of the Universe Revelation, you have to figure out, well, who's it for? When was it created? What is its purpose? Now, as far as purpose and audience, well, that's pretty easy. This is for the people who grew up with Masters of the Universe back in the 80s. Myself, my generation. This was, like I mentioned in the first video, this was kind of required viewing. This was we had the action figures, right? We saw the cartoons. We had the toys and all these different things. This is very much a nostalgia trip. And that's also one of the more dangerous things about doing something like this, because nostalgia can very easily be weaponized and show you some of the worst aspects of people. Thought Slime has a wonderful video on how nostalgia can be weaponized and used for some pretty dark stuff. So go ahead, and I'm going to put a link in the description below. But first and foremost, this is supposed to be for those people that grew up in the 80s and watched this cartoon. That's the main intended audience. Now, it's not just for us, though. Nobody's going to make something only targeting that demographic. You want a new audience. You want to bring new people into it, right? Just like any franchise, you want to keep it going. You need to bring in fresh blood, right? You got to bring in the new people, the younger kids who didn't grow up with this stuff. So I have the challenge of selling this to my generation and the younger generation born 15, 20 years after the fact. Which brings us to the second part of our criteria. When was this created? If you look at older science fiction, for example, that was created at a certain time when it was fine if, let's say, your entire crew is white and male, and if the only female in your story serves really very little purpose aside from being eye candy and getting blamed when the crew turn into horn dogs. I'm looking at you, Forbidden Planet. Star Trek, as progressive as it was even back in the 60s, first interracial kiss, having a Russian on the bridge, a black woman is in a position of power and agency. She is the voice of the ship. Those are pretty radical things back then, and yet, there's other things that would not fly today, but that's a good thing. Imagine if when Star Trek came back in the 80s for the next generation, if they kept all the 1960s sensibilities, or if we kept it at that, those themes, those attitudes into the modern day. Society changes. We, in many ways, I don't know about many, in a lot of ways, we're getting better at this whole, gender and sex and identity thing. We're getting, more aware of, the prejudices that we carry. Back in the 90s, Star Trek did a lot of stuff that was radical even for the 60s, and yet it still did stuff that by today's standards didn't push things enough. It didn't address a lot of different things. So this show, He-Man Masters of the Universe, it's not really a He-Man show, it's Masters of the Universe Revelation. This show is made for not just me, my generation, my peeps. It is made for an audience today, an audience that is very diverse. That's not to say that the audience back in the 80s wasn't diverse, that there weren't boys and girls watching the show and playing with the action figures. That my wife had more He-Man toys than I did when I was younger. This was I'm more than sure she was actually probably a bigger fan of this growing up than I was. But now you have an audience that wants representation, that wants diversified roles, that wants the men and the women to have a little bit of the spotlight. And a lot of fans are taking very much offense to that. One of the biggest complaints that I kept seeing was they killed He-Man. He-Man's not in the show. Okay. You're kind of right. He was killed in the first episode, so was Skeletor. How dare a franchise kill off its main character and then leave us with all the secondary characters to see how they're dealing with it? Who does that? Which brings me to my second point. Do you really think He-Man was going to stay dead? No, seriously. We have literal decades of shows that kill off a character and then have that character come back. We know they're going to come back. I mean, main characters in these franchises stay dead very, very rarely. That's the exception. Do you honestly think they're going to keep He-Man dead? Prince Adam is not dead at the end of these 5 episodes. Skeletor came back. It's probably going to be out of commission. I'm sure it's going to be Teela's story. But a lot of the fans are pissed off that we're focusing on other characters. It's not just that we're focusing on other characters, we're specifically focusing on a woman. That's the other thing that kept coming up. Why has it got to be a woman? And there's also the hint that, Teela might not exactly be on the straight and narrow, there's a little something going on there, And I saw a lot of people taking offense with that as well. How dare you make... That's another big complaint that keeps coming up with newer, older franchises too. Why do all these characters have to be gay? I don't know how to break this to you, but gay people have always been there. Right now, in my generation, it's something like 10 or 15% that identify as either non-binary or queer or LGBTQ in some way. And it's not that they suddenly became gay the last 15 years. It's that it's now possible for them to come out and be who they are. And, not be afraid of being arrested. There's still stigma in a lot of communities, but it's not what it was before. The other big complaint that I kept seeing was that Tila was supposedly like this, perfect Mary Sue character. Like everything about her is, how great she is, and all the men are being put down so that she can be propped up. Did we see the same show? Did we see the same show? Did we not see how broken she was? What an emotional mess this woman was. I mean, and that's one of the things that you got to do when you review or you critique something. We all have to be on the same page about what we saw, right? Hold on. I mean, I could never do this in a real class, but you know what? It's YouTube. I mean, if we're going to do a lesson on how not to review or critique something, how you have to meet a certain standard as to like, this is the thing and this is how I'm going to judge it. I stupidly watched the video from the Critical Drinker talking about this series, and I regret it, but it did have pretty much everything that I'm talking about. It's a nice little package of everything that is just wrong in critiquing this. If you don't like this show, that's fine. But how you're judging it tells me a lot more about you than it does about the show. Now, the Critical Drinker went ahead and made the big claim that Tila was supposed to be this perfect, super awesome. Like her fear is that she's too good. No, that wasn't what the episode was about. It's not that she's too good. The whole problem was that she's been put on a path that she doesn't quite understand. She's been put on a path where she's expected to be something that she doesn't know if she can be. And her claiming that and basically saying, screw you, that was her confronting her fear. Her fear isn't that she's too awesome. That's not what was said or done. The other criticism was that she had to have this pep talk from her, what was the phrase that he used? Something like her diversity partner, that she had to get this pep talk in order to, go out and realize that, so much is still hinging on her. Cringer gave her the talk. We're not even getting the characters right. And then it ends talking about how, the show ends with Skeletor, winning, He-Man's dead, and that's how we're going to end this because, of course, we have to kill He-Man all over again. Did you watch Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, and think, we're just going to end the movie there with the hobbits heading over to Mordor and the others going to go find Merry and Pippin? That's how you're going to end your movie? Really? Yes. Dingus, it's called a cliffhanger. There is nothing more toxic to a fandom than the fans. The really big problem that a lot of fans seem to be having is that He-Man's not in this, and yet he is. In every episode, he's there in flashbacks. Now, you want to make the argument he's not there entirely? Well, that's because this is the story of what happened when He-Man supposedly died. I'm looking at Death of Superman. I'm looking at Battlestar Galactica. I'm looking at The Blacklist. All these franchises that did the exact same thing because it's an interesting story. What do you do when the hero is no longer there? Who takes up the mantle? Who takes up the burden? That's a story that's been told a lot of times. It's interesting. And if you don't like the show because it's not like the old cartoon, well, the old cartoon was made in the 80s specifically to sell merchandise. I'm sure there's merchandise for this one as well. I'm sure there's going to be Funko Pops of all the characters again. But you can't judge them the same. I wouldn't judge a modern Star Trek series by the standards of the 1960s series or even the 1980s or 90s series. It's a different audience. It's a different set of expectations. Storytelling in film and television, because this is kind of what that is different now. People expect episodic, season-long story arcs. We expect multiple characters. It's kind of been the trend for the last, 10, 15 years? So if you went into this basically expecting a new version of what you saw 35 years ago, there's no way that's going to happen. And the biggest complaint that I have seen repeated over and over and over again was, how could Tila act like that to Adam's parents? How could she lash out at him? I don't know if any of you have ever lost someone or been in just deep grief and despair and sadness, but it does some weird things where you don't act rationally. Basically, what the rational drinker and a bunch of other people are complaining about is that Tila did not react logically to the loss of two people, really one, that she was very, very good friends with. That her reaction to this tragedy wasn't rational. What?
This is crazy, but I'm having feelings again. Like some kind of 14-year-old kid or something. I mean, you remember feelings, right?
Yeah, I have feelings every single day of my life.
Do you? Are you saying you don't have feelings?
Yeah, people made a lot of really bad decisions in the first episode or two of this series because people don't react logically when exposed to something like that. Oh, she's so unlikable, she's being so mean. Yeah, you chuckle fuck. What do you want her to do? Just like stiff up her lip? If she'd done that, if she would have been, you would have complained that she was oh so cold. There really is no winning with some people. So what all of this boils down to is that whenever you critique something, you're doing so based on a set of standards. What are those standards? All right. How are you judging this thing? Again, you are free to like or dislike whatever you want, but are you judging it fairly? So at the end of the day, what it really boils down to is that there are just some idiots out there. Yeah, and I'm gonna say it. It's not that you're an idiot if you dislike the show. You're not. You can like or dislike it, but my question is, why do you dislike it? You dislike it because it's not the same as the old cartoon? Of course it's not the same as the old cartoon. There are 35 years between them. You don't like it because He-Man is not front and center in every episode? The whole point of the story is what happens when the hero dies. It's not the first time this has been done. You don't like it because the cast is a lot more diverse than the old show and there's a woman front and center. Why is that a problem for you? So really what this backlash has just shown is that once again, the fandom in a wonderful franchise that means a lot to a lot of people is just filled with emotionally stunted misogynists who really should keep their own head up their ass for the warmth. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Thanks for coming. Class dismissed. I mean, what are my qualifications to be talking about something like this? I mean, it's not like I have advanced degrees in this, degrees in writing. It's not like I teach, rhetoric and review, critique, arguments, things like that. It's not like I've been doing it since 2006.